Hi, this is Dr. Giobbi. We're going to take a look at family counseling, chapter 15 in your textbook. And in this lecture, I'm going to be doing a broad overview of family counseling. And we're also going to be taking a look at the strategic family therapy, the strategic therapy approach of Milton Erickson. Erickson's a very colorful theorist, and we're going to be looking at the systems approach to family therapy by Murray Bowen, another interesting character. And I think that to start off with my discussion, some insights about family therapy is it's been my experience when I worked with children in the clinic, in the counseling clinic, it became very evident to me that the symptoms that children were having, it wasn't really what the problem was about. The child it wasn't the depression of the child, it wasn't the anxiety of the child. The child was a symptom of the family. And whenever I would be assigned a child, and when I say child, I mean up until about 18. Once they were 18 years old, I typically did one-on-one therapy, as long as they were living on their own, etc., or had become somewhat independent. But so when I say child, I mean even into older childhood, teenage years, high school years, middle school, and certainly younger. It really came to my attention that the child was a symptom of the family. Sometimes mom would bring the child, sometimes it was a dad who would bring the child. Very seldom was it mom and dad together. At this point in the therapeutic session, it was typically the family had deteriorated to the point that it wasn't mom and a dad any longer. And after I would meet the parents and watch the interaction of the parents with their children, and also observe the interaction of the parents with myself, it became really clear to me, really apparent that the child was a symptom of the parenting. And I left that experience feeling that what would be most useful, I think, is a general training in parenting. But general training and parenting skills would really save a lot of mental health problems with children. That being said, when you target the child as the parent would bring the child to therapy due to some behavior problem, maybe they're oppositional or they're anxious or cutting or an eating disorder or any number of things that the parent could be. It was usually, sometimes it was depression, but usually it was some kind of behavior problem. The child was oppositional, not listening to the parent, and or was having trouble at school, and the school suggested that the child had have counseling. It really became apparent to me that the parent often was presenting the same behavior that they were complaining about in the child, but they were completely unaware of it in themselves. So if the child was having conflict with teachers or conflict with classmates, not able to get along with people, I often found that the parent had a similar kind of personality style, that they were difficult people to get along with. The child was having a problem with authority, the parent was overbearing in certain instances. So it became apparent to me that conjoint therapy was the smartest way to go about this. And you can read more in depth on conjoint therapy in your textbook. I'm not going to lecture too much on conjoint therapy, but just to say that conjoint therapy means that you do individual session with the child, and then you meet as a family unit as well. So it's family therapy and individual therapy with the child, and that's what I opted for in the children that I saw. I would see the child alone, and then I would see the family as a unit. And that wasn't just mom and dad and the child, that would include siblings or anyone else living in the home. I think in one instance I was involved with, there was even a foster child. So it was there were the children, the parents, and then there was a foster child that was involved in the family sessions as well. So in family counseling, we're not focusing so much on the sickness of the individual or the some sort of pathology within an individual. We're looking at the individual as having difficulty within the family unit. It's typically, as we say, functional or dysfunctional style family. So we're going to look through these a broad overview of family counseling, which started to maybe the earliest for family therapy centers was Alfred Adler, but it really started to catch on family counseling in the 1940s and 1950s. This is really the time when the family unit became the focus of psychotherapy. And again, this is an approach that has less to do with diagnosis of mental illness and more to do with functioning as a family unit. So we're going to look at the two of the major approaches, and we'll also discuss a little bit about the benefits of play therapy, which we will be focusing on next week. Now, something that makes family therapy, or an emphasis that family therapy has that you'll find in the dynamic psychotherapies, but maybe not so much in behaviorism, is the idea that we're not working with human beings in a linear cause and effect relationship. So in other words, situation A is causing behavior B. Instead, we're having a very complex, interactive, or highly dynamic. That's actually where psychodynamic comes from, the idea that it's not a one-way cause and effect, but a dynamic interactionist model. So A and person A and B interacting together, or the family constellation together, is forming a very complicated and dynamic interaction that cannot be narrowed down or reduced down to a simple cause and effect relationship. So we're looking at highly complex interactions, and in this systems theory, this is what we're looking at: these systems, how these systems work, these circular systems instead of linear systems, highly dynamic, interactive, A causing B and B causing A interactively. So we look at the dynamic of this on every member of the family and their ways of interacting with each other, and look at the problems of either function or dysfunction within the family. So we could ask, what defines a family? What is a family? How can we? Well, families obviously fall into many different models today. We have certain adjustments, certain ways of understanding families. We can see in different stages of familyhood. We can have the single new young adults that are just leaving home, a new couple, that's a family unit, families with young children, families with adolescents, families launching children and moving on, and families later in life. And these are all distinctly different situations. Having a family unit, having a family that is expecting a young child, having a newborn baby, then going through the school years and toddler years and the school years and middle school, junior school, high school, college, finally leaving home, and then families later in life. The dynamic remains constant, but the situation changes in such a way that you would approach each stage of life of the family in a different way. So your textbook describes in systems theory, and systems theory is a very powerful approach to doing family therapy. They point out that we can make a differentiation between the main problem of enmeshment and disengagement. And with many families, what we have is really a problem with boundaries. And these boundaries are typically informed by different belief systems of the parents, generational belief systems, maybe spiritual, religious belief systems. Often the way people parent is handed down from the way they were parented, etc. So these boundaries, understanding healthful boundaries is one of the main areas of interest in doing family therapy. Having parents learn healthful boundaries with their children, having children learn healthful boundaries with their parents, and siblings having healthful boundaries with each other. We can have a distinction between enmeshment and disengagement when we talk about boundaries. So enmeshment is over-involvement in each other's lives. This is when an enmeshed individual, you don't know where you begin and end and when the parent or where the other person begins and ends. Here's an example of enmeshment. When a parent becomes upset, becomes angry, becomes hostile because the child did something that reflects on them. And the parent says, how do you think other people think of me when you act this way or when you do this? And that would be an example of enmeshment, the idea that the child is part of who the parent is. And to a certain degree that is true. However, the child and their behavior is independent, is an independently volitional individual. So enmeshment is the idea of you're not knowing where you begin and end and where another person begins and ends. So helping a parent to understand that in some ways they will be judged by their child's behavior, for sure. They are not their child. They're separate individuals. Enmeshment is also oversharing. The concept that a mistake many parents make, where they want to be the pal of their children. Oh, my child tells me everything. We're friends. The child. This is a disastrous approach. Children do not need friends. They need parents. Parents set boundaries. So parents who parent in this style, a very laid back kind of, we're all just friends. I'm another one in the gang hanging out with my kid and their friends. This is an enmeshment. This is a sense of poor boundaries. On the other extreme is disengagement. This is too much detachment. This is the parent that is completely uninvolved with the child, that is off doing their own thing and completely ignoring or not having any interest in the child at all. And we can have, as your textbook authors say, many of the differences linked to a common theme. Dysfunctional families have in an extreme position on some continuum, while healthy families achieve moderation or balance between opposite ways of functioning. The most common balancing acts are between enmeshment and disengagement. chaos, and rigidity. The effective or ambiguous, complex or contradictory communication patterns. Healthy families do not have coalitions against each other, so parents and one parent doesn't gang up with another sibling against another parent or against another child. They don't have that, and the hierarchy of authority reflects the capabilities and needs of the family members. So what we should really keep in mind here is that setting a clear sense of boundaries in the family serves to have a healthful family. To over-enmeshment, parents who overshare with their children, parents who include their children on every decision that is made, on every all of the personal business between the parents. They argue in front of the kids. The kids are aware of the parents' personal business. That's enmeshment. That's poor boundaries. On the other hand, the parent who is completely disengaged and shows no interest or affection or bonding with the child, that's disengagement. That's too much. And healthful families seem to find a balance in this. They seem to not be too far in one direction or another. So some of the core concepts we can look at is centripetal and centrifugal aspects. These are terms from the field of physics used to describe relationship styles in families. Centripetal families look inward to the family as a source of joy and satisfaction. These families have clear boundaries and agreeable familial interactions. Centrifugal families look outside for pleasure and satisfaction, so family boundaries and interactions are minimal. So that we might call this a tight-knit family, would be a centripetal family. It's one that's very, the family stays close together. A centrifugal family is kind of, everybody's doing their own thing. Cybernetics. Cybernetics is the study of processes that regulate systems, especially the control of information. So looking at how families communicate with one another. This is part of family therapy, learning how to communicate, learning how to listen, learning how to wait until one's turn to speak. One of the common things you do in a family therapy session is maybe have a special pillow or a special wand or some stick that the person who holds it is permitted to speak, and they hand it to the next person who speaks, and no one else can speak until they have the stick. A lot of people in poor family structures have problems listening and taking turns to really listen to the other person. A dyad is any two-person system. Marital dyad is a relationship between a husband and husband and wife. Nuclear family. The nuclear family is the kinship group of caretaker and children. So that's the nuclear family is all the closest members of that family together. A Holland is a term used to name whole units nested in a larger whole unit, such as the marital dyad within the nuclear family. So these are all terms that are used within family counseling, that if you come across these in a text that you're reading, you'll know what it means. Family boundaries, the explicit and implicit rules in a family system that govern how family members are expected to relate to one another and to people outside of the family. Family homeostasis, a family system's tendency to maintain predictable patterns of interaction. When those processes are working, the family system is in equilibrium. We have the family projection process. This refers to the transformation of a problem in a couple to a child. The process allows the family to maintain an illusion of harmony, but the transmission causes symptoms in the child. Often this child is the identified patient of the problem to be fixed. So that's what we talk about in the family projection process. When the child comes in, it looks like they're the one with the problem, but it's actually they are manifesting the symptoms of the problematic family. Family system is a social system built by repeated interaction of family members. The interactions include patterns of how, when, and to whom members relate. We have the family therapist, and can be practiced as a specialty or profession, a standalone profession. So you can specialize just in family therapy. Family therapy, an encompassing term for therapeutic approaches that have the entire family as the unit of treatment. One can conduct family therapy using a variety of frameworks. We have a feedback loop, which is part of that interactionist model, the process by which a system receives the information needed to correct itself. Self-correction is used to maintain a steady state of homeostasis or to move towards a goal. So the therapist works as the feedback, the person that's not a part of the family unit that's pointing things out to the family unit, and gives that feedback to enter that into the family dynamic. And that hopefully is what manifests positive change, of course, setting clearer boundaries, even hierarchical boundaries between parents and children, which can be a real problem. Often parents may have grown up in a situation where one of their parents was overbearing, or maybe even abusive or angry or hostile, cold, and they overcompensate in the other direction, setting no boundaries with their children, and then the child doesn't respect them. Because of course, if a child will test the parent, and in testing the parent, they're seeing if the parent is smart enough to take care of them. If the child feels they can pull one over the parent, then how are they going to trust the parent to protect the child from others? So this testing takes place from the child to the adult, and the parent needs to develop the skills to know how to handle the testing of the child. A lot of behavior problems are testing, and make that child say, oh my goodness, I can't pull anything over on my parents. And that's when the child feels safe, because now they know they can be protected by the parent. Triangulation, very important aspect of family therapy. It's the process of a third person or thing being added to the dyad. It is one of the most complicated relationships in family relationships is three. This is a common issue with when there's an only child. If there's poor boundaries and the parents are not a united front, and there's poor boundaries, there can be a triangulation where a parent and child gang up on another parent. And then we have other issues that take place, such as I'll describe shortly. We have family rules. They prescribe rules for the boundaries of permissible behavior. The rules may not be verbalized, but are understood by all family members, and these rules regulate and help stabilize family systems. One of the biggest issues that we have in unstable families or dysfunctional families is a lack of a clear set of rules for that family. These are skills that could be taught very easily in a parenting course, say in high school or something of this nature. But we don't have, we have quite a few parents that are parenting the way they were parented, which may not have been the most functional way of parenting. Family narratives and assumptions. These are beliefs about the world shared by the family members. Some see the world as a friendly, orderly, predictable place in which they can function competently. Others see the world as threatening, unstable, and unpredictable, therefore dangerous. The family story links certain experiences into a sequence that justifies how and why they live as they do. So these kind of family myths, ways that worldviews get handed down, and often when there's a child that as they're growing up, they separate from that. They challenge that family's belief system, the unspoken narratives and assumptions about the world, and they choose a different way of viewing the world, break free of that. This can often turn into a difficulty for the parents. So helping families to identify their unspoken worldviews, their unspoken narratives about the world, and teaching them how to integrate other worldviews into their family. Pseudo-mutuality and pseudo-hostility, the facade of togetherness that masks the underlying conflict and collusion of quarreling that is superficial tactic for avoiding deeper issues. Classic example of this is the family photo where it's almost artificially forced. Everybody's wearing the same outfit, the same shirt, the same color trousers, and they're all together presenting this artificial cohesiveness. This would be a pseudo mutuality. This is like putting on the front that everything's perfect, and it's more of a performance for outsiders than it is when you learn that behind those perfect smiles and everybody's happy, that there's a lot of dark things going on in that family. So sometimes putting on this image, this fake image of the perfect family, is something that has to be addressed. Mystification, an effort to obscure the real nature of family conflict by distorting experiences, contradicts one person's perceptions, and after repeated experiences leads to the person to question reality. So this is the idea that someone, their way of viewing the world is called into question because it's not congruent with the family's way of viewing the world. And scapegoating. One of the biggest issues is scapegoating. That's redirecting conflict by holding one person responsible for whatever goes wrong. You'll find in families that there can be a scapegoating. If there's marriage conflict, the one parent can play the game of scapegoating the other parent to the child, always saying, well, if it wasn't for your father, or if it wasn't for your mother. So this is a scapegoating problem that can exist in families. So we turn to systems approach theory, which is one of the family therapies, and this is really developed by a fascinating character named Murray Bowen, Dr. Murray Bowen, and I've included links to some of his videos that you can watch him online, and there's a large collection of his teaching videos that you can check out. What Bowen really looks at in systems approach is finding a healthy balance between enmeshment and disengagement, and also how to come to terms with individual identity while maintaining a cohesive membership in a group. So how to be oneself without losing oneself in the group. Of course, one of the big issues that a therapist would point out is between the spouse, the relationships between husband and wife, spousal relationships. Is there an identity that is maintained individually? In other words, does each person maintain the respect and commitment of the marriage or of the relationship, and simultaneously have other friends that they spend time with and interact with? secondarily to the primary relationship of spouses. Um, this is the idea of maintaining a sense of individuality, not only through individual relationships with other people, but individual pursuits and interests. So, having some personal interest that one pursues that's separate from the partner, and helps to maintain a distinct sense of identity of the individual. And now the partner might share with their other partner these interests. However, this is something that is distinctly something of their own. And it's important, Bowen concludes, it's important for individuals to have their own individual sense of identity, and also to be able to integrate that individuality into the couple. So looking at the relationship between the mom and dad, he also talks about the differentiation of the self. Now this is very big term for something simple. It's being able to stop reacting to emotions, and stopping a reaction and having more of an action, realizing that I am not my emotional state. My emotional state arises, I can take information from it, but I'm under no obligation to believe it. I'm under no obligation to take it seriously. It could be mistaken, and I'm under no obligation to react to it. I can just take it as a piece of information. Now, some forms of therapy will see that emotional response as something that needs to be avoided. But for Bowen, it's not something that's avoided, it's something that's taken into consideration, but not taken as the final word. It needs to be paused, it needs to be thought of. So you get in the habit of pausing when feeling these rising emotions due to some triggering event from something triggers an event from childhood, some sensitive issue. And of course, as Freud taught us, we can cast all our demons from our garden, but when we have children, they'll all come flooding back. So as soon as we have children, all of those things we thought we put to sleep from our childhood suddenly come knocking at our own door again. And often what we're reacting to emotionally and issues with our families and our children are issues that are sensitive to our own childhood and our own past. So a differentiation of self. This is learning how to pause, take in the emotion as a piece of information, but not react, but act. And this is helpful, especially when families are going through difficult, stressful times, crises. Sometimes families are doing fine, and then a crisis hits, and things fall apart. People begin acting in stressful and anxiety-induced reactions, and this is a time for differentiation of the self. Differentiation of the self is also differentiation with other family members, not adopting the emotional reaction of another family member and instead remaining active rather than reactive to other family members. So this is the idea that within ourselves we have a certain ability to pause when we feel anxiety or stress or a strong emotion pop up within ourselves, and we can also pause and remain differentiated when a family member has one of these charged emotions. And of course, this would be a great example of enmeshment. When we react to another person's emotional state, that's an enmeshment. So we have Bowen's concept of differentiation. Bowen describes detriangulation of self from the family emotional system. Triangulation, another important concept in Bowen's theory, the authors say, refers to the practice of two family members bringing a third family member into conflictual situations. Therapists attend to the extent a husband and wife involves one of their children in a problem situation that the two of them should handle alone. Another example of triangulation is involvement of a person outside of the marital dyad, such as a lover, to fulfill unmet needs in the marriage. So we see here that this triangulation needs to be addressed. Families need to be aware of not triangulating with the children, and also the tendency can happen when the wife goes out and talks about the husband to her girlfriends, or to the mother or father, or the husband goes and talks to his buddies about the problems. This causes a triangulation. This can cause very difficult dynamics. So the family systems therapist will address this and advise in more productive ways for the individuals to handle their problems privately and discreetly with the aid of someone like the family therapist. The nuclear family emotional process. This is another very dynamic enmeshment that can take place. The nuclear family emotional process refers to how family systems operate to handle anxiety and stress in those times of crisis. Several symptoms are indicators of the way the system works. Emotional distance, when one family member avoids or gives the silent treatment to another, is an early symptom of family trouble. So this is the style that a family member stops talking to you because they're angry at you, or they're trying to teach you a lesson, or they're bitter about something. A second symptom could be the transfer of a family problem to a child, such as when a mother displaces her anxiety on the child by becoming worried and overly concerned about how the child is doing. So this is the parent who has anxiety and is unsure of themselves and nervous, and they inflict the child with this by constantly pampering the child and asking if they're okay, and telling them, be careful of this, be careful of that. And this sets the stage to transfer that anxiety from the parent to the child, this personality anxiety. A third system occurs when two family members become blamers, pointing the finger at each other and the cause of the problem. So blaming, this is a family emotional process, getting into the blaming situation. And finally, a fourth symptom surfaces when one partner develops a disability or becomes dysfunctional. The second partner is forced to adapt to the dysfunctional partner by taking more control, making decisions, and handling responsibilities for the dysfunctional partner. Over time, the increased workload may be resented by the partner in charge as the dysfunctional partner becomes even more dependent and develops more symptoms. Such situations are generally headed towards major blow-ups. So these are the things you look for when you are these are common issues that will come up within families that Bowen is aware of, and he describes that you can be on the lookout for these when you're meeting with family to understand their common dysfunctions. Like Alfred Adler, Bowen was very conscientious of sibling position, of the birth order, and understanding how that birth order, how the roles and the positions within the birth order are adding to any dysfunction. And also understanding, as Bowen noticed, that people in certain birth orders tended to marry individuals in similar birth orders. So an only child tended to marry only children. Oldest child tended to marry or have children with oldest child, and how this then creates kind of a synergistic effect of that way of being that's then passed on to the child. So within the family systems, you look at the emotional systems of the family we just described, you point out these common issues. You attempt at achieving differentiation for the individual and each individual within the group. And you do this by pointing out where enmeshment is taking place, teaching healthful boundaries, as they say, using I statements and taking ownership for your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The family member's behavior can only be understood within a family context. So there is never the child with the problem child. This is a family child. A family problem, not a child's problem. And the therapist initiates what happens in therapy and plan for solving each problem. So it's really like a coach, a family coach. And in many ways, as we're going to see, this form of family therapy is really, it's like teaching parents how to parent. It's teaching parents how to avoid what they might take for granted as being just the way you do things, just the way you parent. I'd like to turn now to strategic family therapy. And this is really developed by a very controversial and fascinating individual named Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson, not to be confused with Erik Erikson, it's a different spelling of Erickson. But Milton Erickson, I first encountered Milton Erickson as a hypnotherapist when I studied hypnotism and hypnotherapy. Milton Erickson was the authority on hypnotherapeutic techniques. I then read a few books on Erickson and written some of his own writings and watched some of his seminars. And I realized I was in the presence of someone who was really innovative and playing by his own rules. And some of the things that Erickson did in therapy with his patients, I don't know what would happen today if people did it, but they were highly effective. So strategic family therapy is filled with very unique approaches to each individual within the family. The core of the idea here is family members' behavior can only be understood within the context of the family. You don't look at individuals, you look at the individual within within the context of the family. The therapist is highly directive and initiates what happens in therapy and a plan for solving each problem. And there's this is the strategy. There are different strategies that Milton Erickson used. One of those strategies, these interventions, was the paradoxical invention. And this is when you harness the strong resistance clients have to change and to taking the therapist's directives. So you use this resistance to your advantage. So what's an example of this? You'll see Milton Erickson describe some of his own examples, but you say the paradox. The therapist will encourage the bad behavior. He'll tell the child who's acting out, I want you to act out as much as possible. Whenever you get the chance, I want you to throw a tantrum. Even if you don't feel like throwing a tantrum, throw a tantrum. And this creates in the child a certain conundrum because he's being directed by the therapist to do something that he knows he or she is not supposed to do or not allowed to do. And a certain mechanism kind of clicks and the child loses the interest in doing the behavior simply because, I guess, the paradox of they're being encouraged to do that, and suddenly it doesn't have any resistance to it. So listen to what your textbook authors have to say about the paradoxical intervention. Paradox can take forms of reframing, restraining, prescribing, and redefining. Restraining means the therapist tells the family they cannot do anything except what they're doing, setting up a situation for the family to prove otherwise. Prescribing involves therapists telling family members to act out the problem behavior. For example, a counselor tells an insomniac to see how long the person can go without sleeping. Maybe even enter a stay awake contest or go for the world's record, and tells the tantrum throwing child to have more tantrums and the child's parents to provide a private room for the tantrums. Redefining allows the therapist to provide positive connotations to the symptom or trouble. The idea that the symptoms mean something to the people who are exhibiting them, whether the meaning is logical or not. An example would be the counselor telling the family that the child who suddenly does not want to go to school is really trying to keep her parents together by keeping their attention on the child's problems. So there we have the idea of redefining, seeing that the child's not wanting to go to school, what the child's problem behavior is really functioning to do something else. That's redefining it. And the paradoxical would be restraining or prescribing, so saying you can't do something or you are allowed to do something that takes the problem behavior and makes it ridiculous, because it loses its sting once it's prescribed to be done. Tantrums are no longer fun when you're told you can have a tantrum. Insomnia, you can't fall asleep, choosing, let's see how, play a game. It's like what they call reverse psychology in the pop psychology world. Let's see how long I can stay awake. And suddenly sleeping sets in. In another paradoxical intervention, the counselor takes a one-down position, encouraging the client not to do too much too soon. Clients often play the wooden leg game, which highlights the client's disabilities and the reasons why the client cannot function properly. In the one-down position, the counselor emphasizes that the client has already doing despite the problems and suggests that the client must have great inner strength even to show up for counseling. Clients who handicap themselves through the anticipatory anxiety over activities such as making speeches, taking tests, or meeting new people are directed to practice failing. Practice the symptoms of fear. Practice trembling, making the voice tremble. Practice feeling nervous, stuttering, passing out, or practice failing. It's the idea of embracing failure. And suddenly the desire to fail undoes any anxiety of failing. So sometimes there are musicians who will intentionally hit a wrong note just to take control of their anxiety. They often, the book tells us they often tell test anxious people to take practice tests and fail each one. This is a way of undoing. It's a paradoxical approach that undoes the anxiety that's surrounded around the prohibition once again. It's redefining, reframing. So I would greatly encourage you to watch the Milton Erickson videos that I've posted. Look for more on your own that you can explore on the internet, and maybe even get some of his books. He's really a fascinating character who you will find is very controversial and has some pretty unchained ideas about how to go about therapy. Let's take a look at play therapy with families. Of course, as we know, children younger children can really be really learn through playing. And in our next chapter that we're going to explore, we'll be focusing on techniques of play therapy next week. But the family can play together. So it turns out that the more families do play things together, the more they learn how to function in a functional way, function together in a positive way. Playing doesn't necessarily mean games. When you have playing of games, there can be problems with winners and losers, competition, unless you're playing games that encourage cooperation. But many play therapists avoid games that have a winner or a loser, because then you have certain family members who become the winner, who becomes a loser, and the emphasis becomes on competition rather than cooperation. So when we talk about play, we're talking more maybe about creative play, imaginative play, taking a hike, going camping, playing in a sandbox, playing in the woods, playing with toys, any way that the family can interact with one another. The therapist watches the family playing together and points out different scenarios that are taking place to the parents, to the older children as well, of how their interaction is. So you can look at play in this way, in dynamic play. And also understanding play as things you do for fun. Go swimming together, go surfing, go to the ocean, play in using art. Expressive art therapy uses a lot of these play therapy ideas where it's low technique and high expression. So drawing or painting or using clay. Land art is a great way of doing play therapy, where families interact, maybe writing a play or putting together a play and acting it out together, a theater play, or making a movie together, or writing music or playing music together as an ensemble if family members play an instrument. So when we want to broadly understand play, not as playing games with a winner or a loser, but playing in a more creative, spontaneous, cooperative, interactive way. What are some of the factors that lead to change? Alliance between the family and a caring, competent counselor who understands the problem. Changes in the way people think in the family that lead to greater awareness, understanding, and shared sense of purpose. Changes in the way family members are acting. Strengthening family relations, promoting constructive dialogue, enhancing disclosure are the other mechanisms that stimulate change in family. Strong boundaries, knowing boundaries between each other, parents knowing their boundaries between each other, parents setting clear boundaries with the children, and counselors who are aware of, create, and monitor those conditions will have a greater likelihood of successful family therapy. So this is a broad overview of family therapy, and as I said, when I worked with children and adolescents up until, I didn't do this with college age, but teenagers up until 16, 17, 18 years old, I would then see them only by themselves. But up until that point, I would see the individual and then I would see the family as a unit. So this is family therapy's one of the most powerful techniques that you can have in your quiver for doing therapy.